G'day folks, my name is Mick Cullen from Aeropower and today we're going to look at a question we got on Facebook from Mishka. Mishka asks, what are the benefits of a multi-engine helicopter over a single-engine helicopter? So there's quite a few different factors here, and this is by no means a definitive answer, but let's go through and look at some of those items. Okay, so let's look from a pilot's point of view first of all. So very selfishly, us as pilots, a multi-engine helicopter is going to come with more knobs to twiddle, more levers to basically push and pull, and it's generally going to be a bigger helicopter as well. So as a pilot, generally as you progress in your career, multi-engine is where you want to go. Again, this is the extra complexity and the types of operations that you're doing, so that's a big factor in a multi-engine versus single-engine helicopters. And the other obvious thing that folks sort of associate with multi-engine helicopters is an increase in safety. But it's not actually as big an increase as you might think. So obviously if you've got your two engines and you have a power loss or an engine failure, you'll still have the second engine, so hopefully you'll still be able to progress or land with some kind of power, whereas in a single engine helicopter, obviously if you do lose power or lose an engine, you are committed to that authoritative landing and to the ground. It's not always a guarantee though, because quite often even in a multi-engine helicopter, depending on your height, your speed and the weight of the helicopter, you're not always going to be able to actually maintain your height, and especially if it happens on approach or shortly after takeoff, you'd still be quite committed to having a forced landing directly in front of where you are. But perhaps that second engine or the extra engines in the helicopter are just going to buy you a little bit more time to make that landing. Generally with multi-engine helicopters as well, you'll have more than the one electrical generator, so you have a bit more backup for your electrical power. The consideration though is, even though you've got more than one engine, you've still only got one drive shaft, you've still only got one main rotor in most cases, you've still only got the one tail rotor. And it's still quite easy to run out of fuel and have fuel starvation. So that extra safety margin is definitely not double, because there's always other points in the helicopter which is still a single point of failure, even if you do have the multi-engine helicopter. If we're looking at overall risk profiles, you often find that multi-engine helicopters and being larger helicopters, the type of operations they do can also be not so much risky, but sort of more exposed to hazards. So we're talking about night operations, long over water flights and things like that. So just outside the actual operation of the engines and reliability there, multi-engine helicopters, when you're looking at the broad risk range, have to take into account the actual type of operations that they're doing as well. Generally, and again, if you know of a multi-engine piston helicopter, please let me know. But really when we're talking multi-engines, we're talking turbine engines. And the modern engine, regardless if it's turbine or piston, they're incredibly reliable. There's a lot of development, a lot of engineering, and a lot of safety margins and procedures built in. So we're really looking at less than one power loss or engine failure per million flight hours in the helicopter fleet worldwide. So the chances of having a power loss or engine failure really are quite low in a modern helicopter. On the con side, or some of the negative points, I guess you'd say, of a multi-engine helicopter, is definitely there's costs that come with having that extra reliability or that extra safety margin. So one, you've got to carry all that extra weight in the engine, all that extra equipment. So there's a weight and performance issue there, so you're going to need a larger helicopter to make up for that. The cost of your maintenance and the maintenance requirements is obviously going to rapidly increase as you have the multi-engine helicopter. And there's also training liability, so you actually need to have a bit more training, or if you're a company, your training pilots need to do some more regular training and actually have multi-engine experience, because there is quite some different scenarios when you have a problem with a multi-engine helicopter, an engine failure, or a power loss, that you can actually perform the wrong actions and put yourself and the helicopter into a worse state than if you just were responding to a power loss in a single-engine helicopter. On the performance side, something that a lot of folks don't think about is in a multi-engine helicopter, when you're flying along, the engines are actually going to be sharing the load, so neither of them are going to be working as hard as a single engine would be. And when we look at the specific fuel consumption, turbine engines are most effective when they're operating at really high power settings. So the fuel burn of a single engine performing the work is probably going to be less than the two engines which are basically operating lower down that performance graph. Do the two engines or multi-engines actually give you more power in the helicopter? Well, again, not always, because you're limited by your transmission, the amount of torque it can actually produce. So in most twin engine helicopters, the engines can actually perform or produce more torque than the airframe and the drivetrain can actually take. So when you're pulling power and you're lifting something as heavy as you can, or you're trying to get the most performance out of the helicopter, you're actually torque limited by your drivetrain and the aircraft components, rather than actually topping out the engine in most sort of situations. And the reason they do that is in the designers of the aircraft basically plan that if you do lose an engine, you'll actually be able to use the excess power in the second engine there to produce as much as you can. So even if you've got two engines, you may still be torque limited or drivetrain limited, rather than actually being able to use the full power of those two engines when they're both working normally. But as I said, that's not the be-all and end-all answer, and I'd love some feedback if I've got anything wrong, or if you've got another reason why multi-engine helicopters are better than single-engine helicopters, then please leave a comment below this video where you're watching it. And in the notes, so if you're on the website, aeropowerflightschool.com.au, I'll link to two really good documents that go in a bit more depth about this. Thanks very much for watching. If you've got a helicopter question, please send it in via aeropowerflightschool.com.au, and we'd love to get it, and we'd love to get your feedback as well. So until the next video, catch you then.